Aerobic zones versus power zones. What's the difference and how do they apply to your swimming? The first thing we need to know is that our aerobic zones are fantastic for our aerobic base. It's literally in the name. So we're thinking about improving our swimming endurance. That all comes down to this zone right here. We call it zone 2 training. And when we're training in zone 2, if we're running, we can have a mild conversation, but we don't want to. We're working pretty hard. If we're swimming into the wall, we're working hard, but we're able to have a conversation right away. We don't need 5, 10, 20 seconds for our heart rate to come down, so that way we can speak. And that's a really good indicator of how hard we're working. Now, if you're using a heart rate monitor, whether it's the MySwimPro app with your Apple Watch, or you have something to monitor your heart rate, or even if you manually check it with your fingers, you'll know when you're in zone 2. And when you're just getting started, you may actually think this is too slow. You want to go harder. But this is a big mistake a lot of swimmers make. They spend too much time in these zones. We don't really want to spend as much time in zone 3 and 4 when we're talking aerobic zones. So now they have an understanding of what these aerobic zones are. And for me, by the way, that is between 117 beats per minute and 143 beats per minute. So I can go relatively quickly, actually, maintaining 110 beats per minute. The problem is I'm not really working hard enough. I'm not really working my aerobic engine to build this foundation. And a lot of people, they will skip over this and they'll get to the power zones because they think that's how you get faster. But if you don't have some foundation of this zone 2, you're not going to be able to stack on the fun stuff that we're about to talk about next. Again, it could be different for you. These are my zones calculated by a lactate ramp. If you don't have that, you can go off percentage of heart rate max. Now let's talk about the power zones. Now a little bit different for power zones because we're not talking about heart rate. This model is really built off something called FTP. This is functional threshold power. Now I have the swimming analogy for this and that will help explain it, but I wanted to use the more scientific backing here and what the technical names are used. You might also see these zones labeled a little bit differently. They're a little bit different in the MySwimPro app. So let's break them down. If you notice the big difference here, there are 7 zones as opposed to only 5 as defined by FTP. So if you were to go for a swim, a run, a bike, and you were to go for 45 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour, what's the fastest you can go for that longer duration of time? Now you might think, well, I can't really go as fast as what I could do for like a minute or maybe 30 seconds. And that's when we get down to the lower part of this chart on our bottom 3, because now we're getting into these zones as defined by a lot of countries use this formula. It's called SP1, SP2, SP3. These are the anaerobic zones. So we transition from aerobic here at the top into the anaerobic at the bottom. And what's happening in your body physiologically, you're changing energy systems. Your body needs ATP, right? This is the power production plant in your mitochondria. And to get that ATP, your body needs to break something down in order to create that ATP. And what's getting broken down is fat. When we do a harder stint of activity and we're going for a shorter duration at a higher intensity, your body will slow down how much it's oxidizing fat, and instead you're going to go to glucose. And so this is really important to understand this switch that's happening. Now, it's not like you all of a sudden flip a switch. It's like a gradual process. But I created this dotted line so you can sort of see the difference. So the top half of our power zones, this is endurance 1, endurance 2, endurance 3. Then we transition from these endurance aerobic zones where we're oxidizing fat to here where we're breaking down carbs. And so this is a much more quick, it's a faster fuel source because your body needs that ATP fast. And so when we get to the very, very bottom, the technical term here is neuromuscular power, right? These are very, very specific, high intensity, like the highest intensity, shortest duration. You really can only do this for like less than 15 seconds. The neuromuscular system can't handle anything more than that. And if you think you can, well, then you're not in this zone. You're actually probably in anaerobic capacity. So let me now give you an example here of a swim set in each of these different power zones. Now, all of these sets are about 400 meters, and I'm going to use an interval on these because this is really important, because that way you can see based on a swimmer of about my level, I'm using myself as an example, you can see how these break down. So let's start with recovery, right? Zone 1 is just kind of like sleepy swimming, right? We're not really going very fast. This could be considered recovery. This would be a 1/400 freestyle on the 7 minute. So the interval kind of doesn't matter. I'm just going to go for a a stroll in the park, right? I'm not really trying very hard. Now, depending on your swimming level, a 400 continuously could be very, very challenging. And even for myself, if I'm not in peak aerobic swimming shape, I will quickly transition from this zone 1 to this second zone because it's going to take more effort out of me to keep swimming, even if I'm going slow. Like, it's hard to go so slow that your heart rate stays low. That means you're actually very well trained. And the way you get there is by swimming in zone 2 in the aerobic zones. So now let's transition. Okay, well, let's go a little bit harder than that. So what would be a good set for me? So 4 100s freestyle on the 140 interval. So if I were to swim this, maybe I'd come in on the 115. You know, I'm putting in some good effort, but I'm not really going that fast, maybe under 120 on all of these. I'm getting about 25 seconds of rest. Again, we're still doing 400 meters, but now we're going a little bit faster. And this interval allows us to break it up. And now we're in this endurance zone. Then we're going to move to the next zone. This is called tempo technically. And now we still have those 4 100s freestyle, but now they're going to be on the 125. So if you see what I did on the interval, now I went from getting 25 seconds of rest. So now I'm only getting like 10 seconds of rest. And I'm going to have to work harder to maintain that speed using more energy, but I'm going to get even less rest. And then when we get into the fun stuff, this is lactate threshold. This is basically 91 to 105% of your functional threshold power. Now, if you remember the transition period that I mentioned, where we go from oxidizing fat to oxidizing glucose, this is happening right in this phase. We're now really transitioning into the pain game, as I like to say. And we transition, this is where we're over here on these level 4 and 5, and that is level 4, 5 over here. So when we get from our threshold to our best average, the threshold for me would be 4 100s freestyle on the 110, right? Like, I'm struggling to make this. Maybe I can make them in 107 or 108. I literally get 2 seconds of rest. I feel like I'm going to die the entire 4.5 minutes of doing this set. And if you were to ask me to do 5 or 6 100s, it may not be possible, right? Or if I do them, I would come in on like the 109 or 110, and my technique would start falling apart. Everything would start falling apart, and that's really the true test of your threshold. And then we transition over here into the VO2 max as defined by power zones. But now we've now gotten off of this chart of aerobic. Now we're into anaerobic, because now we're getting close to race pace. And we call this best average, BA. Here it's 850s freestyle on the minute. So now the work to rest ratio is completely different. Everything changes when we go from threshold to best average, when we switch from the aerobic zone to the anaerobic zone, because we're really pushing ourselves to maximize our swimming speed. And in order to do that, we need more recovery. So if you look at the work to rest ratio, we go from literally swimming for 65 seconds and resting 5 seconds. That's what we do in threshold, right? Now, the next zone, we're at a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. So now I'm going to swim for 30 seconds. I'm going even faster than I was before, but I'm going to get a 30-second break. So I come in on 30 seconds. Thank God. Get my heart rate down. Heart rate was really high. And then I go again. And we're going to do 8 of those. And that's really, really difficult. But it trains our body to swim faster. And we need to give ourselves more recovery and more rest. Now we're getting into the hot stuff. We're going into the anaerobic capacity. When we're in 6, which is SP2. Now, we're not going to do as many repetitions of this because we're truly going at race pace. This is basically as fast as you can go with some repetition. So instead of 850s, we're going to cut it down to 450s freestyle on the 130, and we are going fast. This is race pace. You know, some coaches call it as fast as possible, AFAP. You're going for it, right? The difference between this zone and the next zone really comes down to mental focus and recovery. Because when you transition from race pace to a true all-out sprint, I mean, there's not going to be that much of a time difference, but a lot of it is going to happen between the ears. This is mindset. This is mimicking a true race. And this is basically, you know, you're going to suit up for a swim. You can't really do this for more than 100 meters. It's just simply not possible. You can do 100, you can do a 50, but when you get into that 200 zone and you're swimming for, you know, more than a minute, we're now pushing away from this intended purpose. So even doing broken swims, where instead of going at 200, you go, you know, 100 and then a 50 and a 50, or you do 450s with a lot of rest, or you simulate a broken swim, not a lot of rest, otherwise you're going back to what we did over here. So it's really important that you understand the key differences between these effort levels. Now, if you're thinking, well, how do I apply this to my swimming? This is like way too much thinking. You know, even if you're a coach watching this, like, oh my God, how do I apply all this? So most important thing, follow a plan. Good news is you don't have to worry about this because we've developed the My Swim Pro app to do all of this for you. We have these effort levels. It guides you along step by step in your watch, and all of these intervals are calculated based on your seed time. So if you load up the app and you go to your profile, you can see what your base times are, and we calculate everything for you. Even if you're building a workout from scratch, we automatically calculate your intervals based on the effort level, based on how fast you are. So if you're serious about swimming, I know you're going to check out the links down below, because whether it's my books, the My Swim Pro app, or our video analysis or in-person retreats, we are here to help you swim faster and smarter than ever before. Now, if you made it this far in the video, it means you're serious about leveling up your swimming. And I know you're going to love this video over here. It's a 60-minute masterclass on how to swim for life. I'll see you over there, and happy swimming.